Negative operations. I'm trapped in the valley system. The wind patterns are creating conditions where normal escape routes are blocked. I need immediate assistance, or I'm going to join Alpha 2 on the maintenance hangar at Randolph Air Force Base, buzzed with the familiar sounds of organized chaos. Wrenches clinked against metal, hydraulic lifts hissed, and the sharp smell of aviation fuel mixed with motor oil hung thick in the humid Texas air. It was 0530 hours on a Tuesday morning in September, and the pre-dawn darkness outside made the fluorescent lights inside seem harsh and unforgiving. The ground. The brutal honesty of Walsh's assessment crystallized the morning's catastrophe. Two state-of-the-art aircraft with highly trained crews were either destroyed or fighting for survival, victims of conditions that had been predicted by experts and ignored by commanders who mistook technology for invincibility. Major Brooks stood frozen beside the radio console, watching his career and his philosophy crumble simultaneously. The pilots he had championed, flying the aircraft he had proclaimed superior, were facing destruction because they had trusted equipment that failed when tested by forces beyond its design parameters. "Sir," Sergeant Patterson called from the meteorological station, his voice carrying the reluctance of someone delivering news that no one wanted to hear. The latest weather update shows conditions continuing to deteriorate. Peak wind speeds are now forecast to exceed 80 knots, with severe turbulence extending to ground level. The update meant that normal rescue operations were impossible. Conventional aircraft couldn't survive in conditions that had already claimed one Chinook and trapped another. The mountain valleys had become a death trap for any technology dependent on predictable environmental conditions. Colonel Martinez turned to survey the operations center, her gaze finally settling on Sarah, who had been monitoring the disaster with the grim satisfaction of someone whose warnings had been vindicated at terrible cost. "Mitchell," the colonel said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would haunt her regardless of their outcome. "How quickly can you get Charlie ready for an emergency launch?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. Everyone understood what Martinez was asking: whether an aging aircraft and experienced crew could succeed where modern technology and confident pilots had failed catastrophically. Sarah looked at the weather displays, showing conditions that exceeded the operational parameters of every aircraft on the base except one. Charlie had been built for a different era, when helicopters were expected to operate in adverse conditions without computer assistance, when pilot skill and mechanical reliability mattered more than technological sophistication. "Ma'am," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was being requested. "Charlie's been ready since dawn. The question isn't whether we can launch, it's whether anyone should fly in conditions like this." The honesty was brutal, but necessary. This wasn't about proving the superiority of older aircraft or vindication of traditional flying methods. This was about risking more lives to save lives that might already be lost, using equipment that might be marginally more capable of surviving conditions that had proven lethal to superior technology. Brooks looked at Sarah with desperation replacing his earlier arrogance. "Mitchell, can your aircraft reach them?" Sarah studied the weather displays and terrain maps with professional detachment, calculating odds that no sane pilot should accept. The mission was technically possible, but only if everything went perfectly in conditions where nothing had gone perfectly for anyone else. "Sir, reaching them is possible. Getting everyone out alive is considerably less certain." The brutal mathematics of mountain rescue in extreme weather had reduced the morning's confident plans to a single, desperate gamble on whether experience could overcome conditions that had defeated technology. The failure was complete, and now the only hope lay with the aircraft and crew that had been dismissed as obsolete. The storm had spoken, and its verdict was written in twisted metal somewhere in the Colorado mountains. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the hangar, clipboard in hand, watching the ground crew perform their final checks on her assigned F-16 Fighting Falcon. At 26, she was already considered a veteran pilot with over 800 flight hours under her belt, but to most of the personnel on base, she remained an outsider. Not because of her skill, her flight records spoke for themselves, but because of something far more complex and insidious. Chen had earned her wings through the Air Force Academy, graduating third in her class with a degree in aeronautical engineering. Her simulator scores had been near perfect, her theoretical knowledge unquestionable, and her physical fitness exemplary. Yet here she was, 3 years into her service, still flying training missions while her male counterparts from the same graduating class had moved on to advanced combat roles overseas. The unofficial explanation, whispered in break rooms and mess halls, was always the same. She hadn't been tested under real pressure. The official explanation was that her psychological evaluation suggested she might struggle with high-stress decision-making in combat scenarios. Neither explanation sat well with Chen, but she had learned to channel her frustration into precision. Every flight was executed with textbook perfection. Every landing was smooth as silk. Every formation flight was a masterclass in coordination. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, the lead maintenance chief, approached her with a satisfied nod. Thompson was a 20-year veteran who had worked on everything from cargo planes to stealth fighters. His weathered hands and grease-stained uniform told the story of countless hours keeping aircraft airworthy. He was also one of the few people on base who treated Chen with the same professional respect he showed every other pilot. "She's ready to go, Lieutenant," Thompson said, gesturing toward the gleaming fighter jet. "All systems check out green across the board. Fresh hydraulic fluid, new brake pads, and I personally calibrated the avionics suite yesterday evening." Chen nodded, appreciating Thompson's thoroughness. "What about the radar system? I noticed some interference during yesterday's flight." Thompson's expression shifted slightly, a brief shadow crossing his face. "Radar's been temperamental lately. We've run diagnostics twice, but everything shows normal. Might just need some recalibration after you get airborne. Sometimes these systems work out their kinks once they're operational." It wasn't an unusual explanation. Military electronics were notorious for their complexity, and minor glitches were part of the job. Chen had dealt with similar issues before and had learned to adapt her flying style accordingly. What she didn't know was that 300 yards away, in the base communications center, a very different conversation was taking place. Major David Hawkins sat behind his desk, reviewing flight schedules with deliberate precision. At 34, Hawkins had built his career on being meticulous, political, and ruthlessly ambitious. He had never been the most talented pilot in any squadron, but he had mastered the art of positioning himself for advancement while ensuring potential competitors faced obstacles. Hawkins had been watching Chen's progress with growing concern. Her flight performance was becoming impossible to ignore, and whispers among the senior staff suggested she might finally be considered for overseas deployment. This possibility represented a direct threat to Hawkins' own carefully orchestrated career trajectory. Lieutenant Bradley, Hawkins called to his aide, a young officer who had quickly learned that questioning Hawkins' methods was unwise. "Sir, I need you to coordinate with maintenance on Lieutenant Chen's aircraft. There's been some concern about radar reliability on her assigned bird. I want them to run a full diagnostic, but—" Hawkins paused, choosing his words carefully. "Make sure they understand that we need realistic field testing. Sometimes equipment performs differently under actual flight conditions than in laboratory settings." Lieutenant Bradley nodded, though something in his expression suggested he sensed the underlying message. "Should I specify any particular parameters for the testing, sir?" "No specific parameters. Just ensure that any irregularities are documented thoroughly. We want to be absolutely certain about equipment reliability before we consider expanding anyone's mission profile." The conversation was wrapped in military bureaucracy and plausible deniability, but its intent was clear. Bradley left the office with instructions that would filter down through the chain of command, reaching maintenance personnel who understood that sometimes equipment needed to malfunction in controlled ways to provide realistic training scenarios. Back in the hangar, Chen completed her pre-flight inspection with characteristic attention to detail. She checked fuel levels, examined control surfaces for damage, and verified that all safety equipment was properly secured. The F-16 was a beautiful machine, sleek and powerful, designed for speed and agility. In the right hands, it could perform maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. As Chen climbed into the cockpit, she felt the familiar surge of anticipation that came before every flight. Despite the politics and frustrations of military life, this moment never lost its appeal. The cockpit was her domain, a space where competence mattered more than perception, where physics and skill determined outcomes rather than office politics. The startup sequence proceeded normally. Engines spooled up with their distinctive whine, instruments came online one by one, and systems checks showed green across the board. Chen's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, each switch and button as familiar as the keys of a piano to a concert musician. Tower, this is Falcon 77 requesting clearance for training mission Alpha 32, Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Falcon 77, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 27 is active, wind is light and variable. Have a safe flight, Lieutenant. The F-16 rolled onto the runway, its engine building to full power. Chen felt the familiar push of acceleration as the aircraft gathered speed, the moment when tons of metal and machinery transformed into something graceful and airborne. The takeoff was flawless, as always. What Chen didn't realize as she climbed into the morning sky was that her radar system had been subtly modified. The changes were sophisticated and nearly undetectable. Small alterations to sensitivity settings and calibration parameters that would cause the system to provide inconsistent readings under specific conditions. To a casual inspection, everything appeared normal. Under stress, however, the modifications would create exactly the kind of equipment failure that could justify concerns about a pilot's readiness for advanced missions. The morning training flight was routine, formation flying with 2 other F-16s, navigation exercises, and basic combat maneuvers. Chen's performance was, as usual, exemplary. Her wingmen, Lieutenant Jake Morrison and Captain Rick Valdez, had flown with her before and had come to expect her precision and reliability. "Nice flying today, Chen," Morrison commented over the radio as they returned to base. "Your formation work is getting scary good." "Thanks, Jake. You guys made it easy." But as they approached Randolph for landing, Chen noticed the first signs of trouble. Her radar display flickered briefly, showing phantom contacts that disappeared when she tried to lock onto them. She made a mental note to mention it to maintenance, assuming it was the same intermittent issue Thompson had mentioned earlier. What she couldn't know was that this was exactly the response Hawkins had been hoping for. The modifications would create a pattern of minor but documented equipment failures that could be used to justify concerns about Chen's aircraft reliability and, by extension, her mission readiness. After landing and debriefing, Chen headed to the maintenance hangar to discuss the radar issues with Thompson. She found him working on another aircraft, his hands deep in an engine compartment. "Sergeant Thompson, I had some radar anomalies during the flight. Nothing major, but some intermittent contacts that didn't correlate with visual or IFF identification." Thompson looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression was troubled in a way that Chen had never seen before. "I'll take a look, Lieutenant. These electronics can be finicky. Sometimes what looks like a malfunction is just the system operating within acceptable parameters under unusual conditions." There was something in his tone that suggested he knew more than he was saying, but Chen didn't press the issue. Thompson had always been straight with her, and she trusted his technical expertise. Over the following weeks, the radar problems became more frequent and more pronounced. Always minor, always explainable, but consistently present in Chen's aircraft while other pilots experienced no such issues. The maintenance logs began to document a pattern of electronic irregularities that painted a picture of unreliable equipment. Hawkins monitored these reports with satisfaction. His plan was working perfectly. Chen's flight performance remained excellent, but questions about her equipment reliability were beginning to circulate. In military aviation, equipment reliability and pilot capability were often viewed as interconnected. A pilot who consistently experienced technical difficulties might be seen as someone who was harder on equipment, less careful with procedures, or simply unlucky in ways that made them unsuitable for critical missions. The psychological pressure was also mounting. Chen began to second-guess her instruments, spending additional time cross-checking readings and questioning data that would normally be accepted without hesitation. This constant vigilance was exhausting and began to affect her sleep and stress levels. During one particularly difficult flight, Chen's radar system provided completely false information about an approaching weather front. She had to rely entirely on visual navigation and communication with air traffic control to avoid a potentially dangerous situation. The incident was minor, but it was documented, and it added to the growing file of equipment-related incidents associated with her aircraft. Thompson watched these developments with increasing discomfort. As a maintenance professional, he prided himself on keeping aircraft in perfect working condition. The idea that equipment under his supervision was repeatedly malfunctioning bothered him deeply, especially since his diagnostic tests consistently showed normal operation. Late one evening, after most of the base had gone home, Thompson decided to conduct his own investigation. He spent hours examining Chen's radar system, running tests that went far beyond standard diagnostic procedures. What he found made his blood run cold. The modifications were subtle but deliberate. Someone with extensive knowledge of avionics systems had carefully altered calibration settings in ways designed to create intermittent failures under specific flight conditions. The changes were sophisticated enough that they wouldn't be detected by routine maintenance checks, but clear enough to cause exactly the kinds of problems Chen had been experiencing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thompson stared at the evidence on his diagnostic screen, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. In 20 years of military service, he had never encountered deliberate sabotage of aircraft systems. The implications were staggering, not just for Chen's career, but for flight safety and the integrity of the entire maintenance operation. The question now was what to do with this information. Thompson knew that making accusations without absolute proof could end his own career, but allowing the sabotage to continue was unthinkable. As he powered down his diagnostic equipment and locked the hangar, he made a decision that would change everything. He would need to be careful, methodical, and above all, he would need irrefutable evidence. But Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson had spent 2 decades ensuring that military aircraft were safe and reliable. He wasn't about to let politics and ambition compromise that mission, regardless of the personal cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just the sabotage of Chen's equipment, but the deeper corruption that had allowed it to happen. What no one yet realized was that Chen possessed skills that went far beyond what any of them imagined, skills that would soon turn their carefully orchestrated plan into their worst nightmare. 3 weeks after Thompson's discovery, the situation at Randolph Air Force Base had grown increasingly complex. Chen continued her training flights, unaware that each mission was being carefully orchestrated to create maximum equipment stress. The radar malfunctions had evolved from simple intermittent contacts to more serious navigation disruptions that forced her to rely heavily on backup systems and manual calculations. The morning briefing room buzzed with typical pre-flight energy as pilots reviewed weather conditions, flight paths, and mission objectives. Chen sat in her usual spot near the back, studying approach charts for the day's advanced navigation exercise. The mission profile called for low-altitude terrain following through the hill country west of San Antonio, followed by instrument approaches to 3 different airfields under simulated combat conditions. Major Patricia Wells, the squadron operations officer, stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer, highlighting key waypoints on the large screen display. Wells was a straight-shooting officer with 15 years of experience and a reputation for fairness that had earned respect throughout the wing. She had been watching the pattern of equipment issues surrounding Chen with growing suspicion. Today's exercise will test your ability to maintain situational awareness while dealing with degraded navigation systems, Wells announced. Each aircraft will experience simulated electronic warfare conditions designed to interfere with GPS and communication systems. You'll need to rely on dead reckoning, terrain recognition, and backup instrumentation. Chen listened intently, making notes about altitude restrictions and emergency procedures. What she didn't know was that her aircraft would be experiencing more than simulated interference. Hawkins had arranged for additional stress testing of her radar system during the most challenging portions of the flight. Captain Linda Reeves, Chen's assigned wingman for the mission, leaned over during the briefing. "Are you ready for some old-school navigation? This should be interesting without reliable GPS." Reeves was a pilot Chen respected immensely. At 32, she had combat experience from 2 overseas deployments and a reputation for being unflappable under pressure. More importantly, she had always treated Chen as an equal, judging her solely on flight performance rather than squadron politics. "Looking forward to it," Chen replied quietly. "Sometimes I think we rely too heavily on automation anyway." As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out to their aircraft, Major Wells caught Chen's attention. "Lieutenant, a word?" Chen approached the operations desk where Wells was organizing flight plans. The Major's expression was serious but not hostile, more concerned than accusatory. "I've been reviewing your maintenance logs," Wells said, keeping her voice low. "You've had an unusual number of avionics issues lately. Is everything okay with your aircraft?" Chen hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "The radar system has been inconsistent, ma'am. Maintenance keeps telling me everything checks out normally, but I'm definitely seeing anomalies during flight." Wells nodded slowly. "I've noticed the pattern." Here's what I want you to do. If you experience any significant navigation or communication problems today, I want you to abort the low-level portion and return to base immediately. No heroics, no trying to push through it. Safety first. The conversation was brief but significant. Wells was clearly taking the equipment issues seriously, which suggested that Chen's problems had not gone unnoticed by senior leadership. This development would have worried Hawkins considerably if he had known about it. In the maintenance hangar, Thompson was conducting what appeared to be routine pre-flight inspections. In reality, he was documenting everything with meticulous detail, photographing serial numbers, recording calibration settings, and building a comprehensive case file. His investigation had revealed not just the sabotage of Chen's radar, but evidence of similar tampering with other electronic systems. The modifications were sophisticated and clearly the work of someone with advanced technical knowledge. Thompson had narrowed down the list of personnel with the necessary access and expertise to fewer than 6 individuals, but proving deliberate sabotage would require catching someone in the act or finding documentary evidence of the conspiracy. As Chen completed her walk-around inspection, Thompson approached with his usual professional demeanor. "Morning, Lieutenant. I've been working on that radar issue you mentioned. I think I've isolated the problem to a specific frequency band, but I need to see how it performs under actual flight conditions." Chen nodded, appreciating Thompson's continued attention to the problem. "Any idea what might be causing it? Could be electromagnetic interference from other systems, could be a component that's operating at the edge of specifications. Sometimes these issues only show up when multiple systems are operating simultaneously under stress conditions." Thompson's explanation was technically accurate while concealing his true knowledge of the situation. He had decided that catching the saboteurs in the act would be more effective than making premature accusations based on circumstantial evidence. The flight began normally, with Chen and Reeves taking off in formation and proceeding to the first navigation waypoint. The morning air was smooth, visibility was excellent, and both aircraft performed flawlessly during the initial phases of the mission. As they approached the hill country and began the low-level terrain following the portion of the exercise, Chen's radar display started showing the familiar signs of malfunction. Contacts appeared and disappeared randomly, range readings fluctuated wildly, and the terrain mapping function began providing obviously incorrect elevation data. "Falcon 7-7, I'm showing some navigation anomalies," Chen reported to Reeves over the radio. "My radar terrain mapping is giving me bad elevation data." "Copy that, 7-7. I have you visual. Stay on my wing and we'll navigate using my systems." This was exactly the kind of situation Hawkins had hoped to create, Chen being forced to rely on her wingman due to equipment failures, demonstrating what would be characterized as a lack of self-sufficiency in critical situations. But Chen's response was not what anyone expected. Instead of simply following Reeves, she began cross-referencing visual landmarks with her paper charts, calculating headings and distances using mental math, and maintaining precise formation flight through some of the most challenging terrain in Texas. Her flying became more focused, more precise, as if the equipment failures had heightened rather than diminished her abilities. Reeves watched in amazement as Chen navigated through narrow valleys and around steep ridgelines using nothing but visual references and dead reckoning calculations. The precision required was extraordinary, and Chen was executing it while maintaining perfect formation flight at 300 feet above ground level and 400 knots. 7-7, your stick and rudder work is incredible, Reeves commented over the radio. "I've never seen anyone fly terrain following this smoothly without radar assistance." Chen's response was characteristically modest. "Just trying to stay out of the rocks, lead." What Chen didn't mention was that she had spent countless hours studying topographical maps of central Texas, memorizing landmarks and elevation contours as a backup for exactly this kind of situation. Her preparation was so thorough that she could navigate much of the hill country using visual references alone, a skill that very few pilots possessed. Meanwhile, in the base communications center, Hawkins was monitoring the flight progress with growing frustration. The radio traffic indicated that Chen was not struggling with the equipment failures as anticipated. Instead, she seemed to be adapting and overcoming the difficulties in ways that actually showcased her skills rather than highlighting her limitations. Lieutenant Bradley entered Hawkins' office with a concerned expression. "Sir, I'm monitoring the training flight. and Lieutenant Chen seems to be handling the navigation problems very well. Perhaps too well. Hawkins studied the flight tracking display, watching as Chen's aircraft maintained perfect course and altitude despite the reported radar malfunctions. This was not the outcome he had planned for. "Increase the interference parameters," Hawkins ordered. "I want her dealing with maximum electronic warfare simulation." Bradley hesitated. "Sir, that's beyond the approved exercise parameters. If something goes wrong..." "The exercise parameters call for realistic combat simulation. Combat conditions are unpredictable, make it happen." The additional interference flooded Chen's cockpit with false readings and system warnings. Her primary navigation display went completely blank. Communication systems started producing static, and even her backup instruments began showing inconsistent information. For most pilots, this level of system failure would have required an immediate return to base. The combination of equipment malfunctions was beyond what anyone could reasonably be expected to handle while maintaining the low-level flight profile. Chen's response was swift and decisive. She switched to pure visual navigation using landmarks she had memorized during years of studying the terrain. Her hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced efficiency, shutting down malfunctioning systems to prevent false information from interfering with her decision-making process. "Falcon 6677 is experiencing complete navigation system failure," she reported to Reeves. "I'm going to use manual navigation and backup instruments only." 77, recommend you climb and return to base immediately, Reeves responded, following standard procedures for this type of emergency. Negative 66. I have visual references and can continue the mission. The terrain is familiar, and the weather is clear. What happened next would be talked about in pilot briefing rooms for years to come. Chen not only continued the low-level flight, but executed it with a level of precision that seemed almost superhuman. She navigated through winding valleys using visual references that most pilots wouldn't even notice, maintained exact altitude and airspeed without instrument guidance, and completed every waypoint of the planned route within seconds of scheduled arrival times. Reeves, flying alongside with fully functional navigation systems, found herself struggling to keep up with Chen's precise flying. The formation work was flawless, the terrain avoidance was instinctive, and the dead reckoning calculations were accurate to within meters. "Base operations, this is Falcon 66, Reeves called over the radio. "You need to see this. 77 is flying the entire low-level route with complete navigation failure, and she's executing it perfectly. I've never seen anything like this." In the operations center, Major Wells heard the radio call and immediately understood its significance. She had suspected that the equipment failures were not coincidental, and Chen's extraordinary performance under impossible conditions was proving her suspicions correct. Wells picked up the secure phone and dialed Thompson's maintenance desk. "Sergeant, I need you to have a team ready to completely document Lieutenant Chen's aircraft the moment it lands. Every system, every component, every calibration setting. And I want you personally overseeing the inspection." Thompson understood immediately. "Yes, ma'am, we'll be ready." As Chen and Reeves completed the navigation exercise and turned toward home, neither pilot realized that the final phase of their flight would expose the sabotage conspiracy in ways that no one had anticipated. The return to base would require a level of skill that would transform Chen from an underestimated pilot into a legend, and would end several military careers in the process. The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove once and for all that the most dangerous assumption in military aviation was underestimating someone based on appearances rather than ability. Chen's true capabilities were about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible, and the consequences would be both swift and career-ending for those who had orchestrated her sabotage. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Chen and Reeves approached Randolph Air Force Base for what should have been a routine landing. The navigation exercise had been completed with unprecedented success, despite the complete failure of Chen's electronic systems, but the return flight would prove to be anything but routine. As they neared the airfield, Chen's communication systems, which had been functioning intermittently throughout the flight, began experiencing severe interference. The radio crackled with static, voices faded in and out, and even the emergency frequencies were compromised by what appeared to be electromagnetic jamming. In the control tower, Senior Airman Jessica Martinez was monitoring the approach when she noticed the communication difficulties. Martinez was a veteran air traffic controller with 8 years of experience managing some of the busiest military airspace in the country. She had guided countless aircraft through emergency situations, but the pattern of system failures affecting Chen's aircraft struck her as unusual and concerning. "Randolph Tower to Falcon 77, we're receiving your transponder, but your radio transmission is breaking up," Martinez called over the airwaves. "Please switch to emergency frequency 121.5 and repeat your approach request." Chen's response came through in fragments. 77, emergency frequency, fuel state, normal approach. The communication breakdown was creating a dangerous situation. Without clear radio contact, coordinating a safe landing became exponentially more difficult, especially with other aircraft in the pattern and training flights returning from various missions throughout Central Texas. Captain Reeves, flying alongside Chen with functional communication systems, immediately stepped in to bridge the gap. "Randolph Tower, this is Falcon 66. 77 is experiencing complete communication failure, in addition to navigation system problems. She has been flying manual navigation for the past hour with exceptional precision. Request priority handling for emergency approach." Martinez processed this information quickly. Priority handling meant clearing other traffic and giving Chen's aircraft precedence for landing, but it also meant that every aspect of the approach would be scrutinized by senior personnel who monitored emergency procedures. In the operations center, Major Wells was already coordinating the response. She had been tracking the flight since Reeves' earlier radio call about Chen's extraordinary flying skills, and the communication failures were confirming her suspicions about deliberate sabotage. "Tower, this is operations. I'm declaring this a full emergency response," Wells announced over the internal communication system. "I want crash and rescue standing by, and I want a complete electronics investigation team ready the moment that aircraft touches down." Colonel James Patterson, the wing commander, had been monitoring the situation from his office overlooking the flight line. Patterson was a combat veteran with over 3,000 flight hours who had commanded 3 different squadrons during his 22-year career. He had earned his reputation by being both demanding and fair, expecting excellence while supporting his pilots through difficult situations. Patterson picked up the phone and called directly to the control tower. "Martinez, this is Colonel Patterson. What's the current status of Falcon 77? "Sir, the aircraft appears to be flying normally, but we have no direct communication. Falcon 66 is relaying that 77 has been experiencing multiple system failures throughout the flight but has maintained mission completion." The comment drew nods from Walsh and Chen, but Sarah noticed that Colonel Martinez, who had been listening quietly from the back of the room, wore an expression of thoughtful concern. Dr. Foster pulled up historical weather data. "Major, I need to emphasize that these aren't just, quote, difficult conditions. The wind speeds we're forecasting have historically resulted in aircraft accidents. Last year, a similar weather pattern caused 2 helicopter crashes in similar terrain in Colorado Springs." The mention of actual crashes shifted the room's atmosphere. Training exercises were meant to simulate danger, not created through unnecessary risk-taking. Sarah felt obligated to voice her growing concerns. "Dr. Foster, based on your analysis, what would be the safest approach for aircraft operations during this weather window?" "Ideally, postponement until the system passes. If operations must continue, limiting flights to lower altitudes with maximum safety margins, using only aircraft and crews with extensive mountain weather experience, and maintaining constant communication with meteorological monitoring stations." Brooks's patience finally snapped. "Dr. Foster, thank you for the briefing, but operational decisions are made by operational commanders, not weather officers. We've all heard the risks. Now we need to focus on mission execution." The dismissal was professionally delivered, but carried unmistakable finality. Dr. Foster gathered her materials with the resigned expression of someone who had delivered warnings that would be ignored for reasons having nothing to do with meteorology. As the briefing broke up, Sarah approached the meteorologist near the podium. "Dr. Foster, off the record, how bad do you expect this to get?" The weather officer looked around to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Chief Mitchell, I've been forecasting mountain weather for 12 years. I have never seen atmospheric conditions that combined this many hazardous factors simultaneously. If I were making the operational decisions, I would ground all aircraft until this system passes." "How long until it passes?" "Best case, 18 hours. More likely 24 to 36 hours. Sarah thanked the meteorologist and walked toward the exit, her mind processing the implications. The timing meant that Mountain Thunder would proceed directly into the worst possible weather conditions, with mission planners who seemed more concerned about schedule adherence than crew safety. In the hallway outside the briefing room, she encountered Captain Walsh and Lieutenant Chen discussing the weather projections with the casual confidence of pilots who had never been genuinely tested. "The computers can handle wind conditions like that," Walsh was saying. "The flight management systems are designed for exactly these kinds of situations." Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, we'll have real-time weather updates through the data link. If conditions get too rough, we can just abort and return to base." Sarah couldn't resist interjecting. "Captain, have you ever tried to abort a mountain approach in 60-knot winds?" Walsh turned with a slightly condescending smile he reserved for questions he considered naive. "Mitchell, that's exactly why we have automated flight controls. The computer handles the precision work while the pilot manages overall mission parameters." "And what happens when the computer encounters conditions outside its programming?" "That's what the safety margins are for. The system won't let you exceed aircraft limitations." Sarah realized she was talking to pilots who had never learned the fundamental truth that aircraft limitations were often exceeded by circumstances, not choices. "Captain, safety margins assume normal conditions. Mountain weather can create situations where normal limitations become irrelevant very quickly." Chen joined the conversation with youthful confidence. "Chief Mitchell, I understand you're concerned about your older aircraft's capabilities, but modern systems are designed to handle extreme conditions automatically." The comment stung because it revealed how completely Chen missed the point. This wasn't about aircraft age. It was about understanding that sophisticated systems could fail in sophisticated ways when faced with conditions their designers hadn't anticipated. "Lieutenant, sophisticated systems have sophisticated failure modes. Sometimes the simpler approach is more reliable when everything goes wrong simultaneously." Agent Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We've narrowed it down to 6 individuals with the necessary clearance, knowledge, and opportunity. However, we believe this operation required coordination from someone in a position to influence flight scheduling and mission assignments." The implication was clear. The sabotage involved not just maintenance personnel but someone in the command structure who could orchestrate specific flight conditions to maximize the impact of the equipment failures. General Kim leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of the situation. "Are any of the affected aircraft currently airborne?" "Yes, sir." "Lieutenant Chen is returning from a training mission right now in one of the compromised aircraft. Based on radio reports, she's been experiencing the exact type of system failures we would expect from these modifications." As if summoned by their conversation, Kim's secure phone rang with an urgent call from the control tower. He answered immediately. "General, this is the tower supervisor. We have Falcon 77 on final approach with multiple system failures, but—" The voice paused, seeming to struggle with how to describe what was happening. "Sir, you need to see this approach. The pilot is executing a perfect ILS approach with no functioning instruments." Kim glanced around the conference table at the other officers, all of whom had heard enough of the conversation to understand its significance. "We'll be right there." The group moved quickly to the control tower, arriving just as Chen's F-16 was turning on to final approach. The late afternoon sun created a dramatic backdrop as the sleek fighter aircraft lined up with the runway, appearing to float effortlessly through the air, despite the reported system failures. Senior Airman Martinez was coordinating with multiple agencies while maintaining professional calm that belied the extraordinary nature of the situation. Falcon 66 maintain visual separation with 77. Crash and rescue vehicles are standing by. The runway is clear and ready. Through the tower's large windows, the assembled officers watched as Chen's aircraft descended along the glide path with mechanical precision. Without functioning instruments, she was flying the approach using visual references alone, compensating for wind drift and adjusting her rate of descent based purely on experience and instinct. Colonel Patterson, who had flown similar approaches under combat conditions, shook his head in amazement. "I've seen experienced combat pilots struggle with visual approaches in perfect weather. She's flying this like she has full instrument capability." Agent Rodriguez was documenting everything with both written notes and video recording equipment. The extraordinary nature of Chen's approach would serve as crucial evidence in the criminal investigation. demonstrating not only the extent of the sabotage but the exceptional skill required to overcome it. As Chen's aircraft crossed the runway threshold, the tower fell silent. The landing was so smooth it seemed almost gentle, with no bounce, no drift correction, and touchdown exactly at the specified aim point. The aircraft rolled out straight down the center line and turned off at the designated taxiway without any indication of the equipment failures that had plagued the entire flight. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Kim said quietly, "we just witnessed something extraordinary, and we're going to make sure everyone responsible for trying to prevent it faces the full consequences of their actions." Captain Reeves landed immediately behind Chen, and both aircraft taxied to the maintenance area where Thompson's investigation team was waiting with comprehensive diagnostic equipment. The post-flight inspection would provide the final pieces of evidence needed to identify and prosecute everyone involved in the sabotage conspiracy. But even as the wheels of justice began to turn, Chen remained unaware of the broader implications of her flight. She was focused on completing her post-flight checklist and debriefing, having no idea that her performance had just provided irrefutable evidence of a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the squadron command structure. The investigation was about to accelerate dramatically, and the consequences would extend far beyond anyone's expectations. The extraordinary skills Chen had displayed during her compromised flight would soon force a complete re-evaluation of not just her own capabilities, but the entire system that had allowed such sabotage to occur in the first place. The stage was set for revelations that would shake the foundation of Randolph Air Force Base and end multiple military careers in spectacular fashion. As Chen's F-16 came to a complete stop on the tarmac, Thompson's investigation team moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they had connected diagnostic equipment to every electronic system on the aircraft, while Chen completed her shutdown procedures in the cockpit. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere for what was about to unfold. Chen climbed down from the cockpit, removing her helmet and flight gear with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. She appeared calm and focused, showing no signs of the stress that would normally accompany a flight plagued by multiple system failures. To the casual observer, she had just completed a routine training mission. Colonel Patterson approached as Chen finished her post-flight inspection. His expression was a mixture of amazement and concern that Chen had never seen before on a senior officer's face. "Lieutenant Chen, that was an extraordinary display of airmanship," Patterson said, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened up there, starting from when your systems first began malfunctioning." Chen straightened to attention, but Patterson waved her to a more relaxed posture. This conversation was clearly going to be different from a standard debrief. "Sir, the radar anomalies began during the low-level portion as briefed, but escalated to complete navigation failure about 40 minutes into the flight. Communication systems became intermittent shortly after, then failed completely during the approach phase." Patterson nodded, making mental notes that would later become part of an official investigation report. "How were you able to maintain such precise navigation without instruments?" Chen hesitated, uncertain how much detail to provide. "I've spent considerable time studying topographical charts of Central Texas, sir. Visual landmarks and dead reckoning calculations provided sufficient navigation reference for the mission profile." What Chen didn't mention was the extent of her preparation. She had memorized not just the major landmarks, but elevation contours, drainage patterns, road networks, and even seasonal vegetation changes across thousands of square miles. Her mental map of Texas terrain was so detailed that she could navigate by visual reference alone under almost any conditions. Meanwhile, 30 feet away, Thompson was discovering something that made his previous findings seem minor by comparison. The diagnostic readouts from Chen's aircraft showed a level of electronic interference that exceeded anything he had documented before. The sabotage wasn't limited to simple calibration changes. Someone had installed sophisticated jamming devices designed to create cascading system failures. Thompson called Agent Rodriguez over to review the data. "Sir, you need to see this. The interference patterns are too complex for simple component modification. Someone installed active countermeasures equipment designed to simulate enemy electronic warfare." Rodriguez studied the diagnostic screens with growing amazement. As an OSI investigator, he had seen various forms of equipment tampering, but never anything this elaborate or potentially dangerous. "This goes way beyond sabotage," Rodriguez muttered. "This is the installation of unauthorized military hardware for the purpose of creating artificial combat conditions. The security implications alone." He pulled out his secure communication device and placed an encrypted call to OSI headquarters. The investigation had just escalated from criminal mischief to potential national security violations. While this technical revelation was unfolding, Chen was providing her detailed flight debrief to an increasingly amazed group of senior officers. As she described her navigation techniques and decision-making process, it became clear that her performance represented far more than good basic pilot skills. Major Wells, who had been taking detailed notes, looked up from her clipboard with an expression of stunned realization. "Lieutenant, the precision you're describing, visual navigation accurate to within meters over a 100-mile route, that's not standard pilot training." Chen's response was characteristically modest. "I've always been interested in traditional navigation techniques, ma'am. Before GPS and modern avionics, pilots had to rely on these methods routinely." "But where did you learn this level of precision?" Patterson pressed. "This isn't something covered in undergraduate pilot training or even advanced courses." For the first time since landing, Chen's composed demeanor showed a crack of uncertainty. The question touched on aspects of her background that she rarely discussed with anyone, personal interests and abilities that went far beyond standard military training. "Sir, my grandfather was a navigator on B-24 Liberators during World War II. He taught me celestial navigation and dead reckoning techniques when I was growing up. I've always practiced these skills as a hobby." The word hobby seemed inadequate to describe what they had just witnessed, but Chen's explanation began to make sense of the extraordinary performance. She hadn't just overcome equipment failures. She had reverted to navigation techniques that were considered obsolete 50 years ago, executing them with a precision that surpassed modern electronic systems. General Kim, who had been listening to the debrief through his communication link with the flight line, decided it was time to reveal the full scope of the investigation. He picked up his secure phone and called Colonel Patterson directly. "Colonel, I need Lieutenant Chen and all senior personnel involved in this incident in my conference room immediately." It's time she understood what she's been dealing with. 20 minutes later, Chen found herself in the installation commander's conference room, surrounded by more high-ranking officers than she had ever seen in one place. The atmosphere was tense and formal, but not hostile. If anything, she sensed an undercurrent of respect that was both unexpected and confusing. General Kim began the briefing without preamble. "Lieutenant Chen, for the past several weeks, you have been the target of a deliberate sabotage campaign designed to discredit your flying ability and prevent your advancement to combat assignments." The words hit Chen like a physical blow. She had suspected that her equipment problems were unusual, but the idea of deliberate sabotage had never seriously occurred to her. Agent Rodriguez opened his investigation file and spread photographs across the conference table. "These images show unauthorized modifications to your aircraft's electronic systems. The changes were sophisticated and required extensive technical knowledge and high-level access." Chen stared at the photographs, seeing her aircraft's components marked with circles and arrows, highlighting alterations she couldn't have detected without specialized diagnostic equipment. The scope and complexity of the sabotage was overwhelming. "But why?" Chen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What could anyone possibly gain from sabotaging my flights?" Major Wells answered with barely controlled anger. "There are people in this organization who saw your advancement potential as a threat to their own career ambitions. They believed that creating a pattern of equipment failures around your flights would cast doubt on your readiness for combat assignments." The revelation continued as Agent Rodriguez detailed the investigation findings. The sabotage involved not just maintenance personnel with technical access, but coordination from someone in the operations chain who could influence flight scheduling and mission parameters. "The good news," General Kim said, "is that your performance today provided irrefutable evidence that completely backfired on the perpetrators. Instead of demonstrating limitations, you showcased abilities that exceed anything we expected." Colonel Patterson leaned forward, his expression serious but supportive. "Lieutenant, the navigation and flying skills you demonstrated today are extraordinary. Visual navigation with that level of precision, successful completion of a complex mission profile despite total system failure, and a perfect approach in landing without instruments. These are capabilities that we see maybe once in a generation." Chen absorbed this information while trying to process the emotional impact of learning that colleagues had been actively working to sabotage her career. The mixture of vindication and betrayal was overwhelming. "Sir, what happens now?" she asked. Agent Rodriguez answered immediately. "Now we identify and prosecute everyone involved in this conspiracy. The evidence we've gathered today, combined with your extraordinary performance, provides everything we need for criminal charges." "There's more," General Kim added. "Your demonstrated abilities have attracted attention at the highest levels of Air Force Command. We're recommending you for immediate assignment to the test pilot school and eventual selection for special operations units that require exactly the kinds of skills you've displayed." The irony was staggering. The sabotage intended to prevent Chen's advancement had instead showcased abilities that qualified her for the most elite assignments in military aviation. Her tormentors had inadvertently provided the perfect demonstration of exactly why she deserved opportunities they had tried to deny her. But even as the investigation moved toward its conclusion and Chen's vindication became complete, the most dramatic revelations were yet to come. The identity of the conspiracy's ringleader would shock everyone involved and demonstrate just how high level the corruption had reached. The evidence was overwhelming, the perpetrators were about to be exposed, and careers were about to end in spectacular fashion. But first, there would be one final twist that would make everything even more satisfying for those who had believed in Chen all along. The tension in General Kim's conference room was palpable as Agent Rodriguez prepared to reveal the identities of the conspirators. Chen sat quietly, still processing the magnitude of what she had learned, while the assembled senior officers waited for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Rodriguez opened a thick, classified folder and withdrew a series of surveillance photographs. "The investigation has identified a network of individuals working in coordination to sabotage Lieutenant Chen's aircraft and discredit her performance evaluations. The conspiracy reaches higher into the command structure than we initially suspected." The first photograph showed Technical Sergeant William Cruz in the maintenance hangar, working on Chen's aircraft after normal duty hours. Cruz was a 15-year veteran with an exemplary service record, making his involvement particularly shocking to those who knew him. Sergeant Cruz had the technical expertise and access necessary to install the jamming equipment, Rodriguez explained. However, our investigation revealed that he was acting under orders from someone with command authority over flight operations. The next photograph was even more damning. It showed Major Hawkins in deep conversation with Cruz near the maintenance facility, apparently coordinating the sabotage activities. The timestamp indicated the meeting had taken place just days before Chen's most problematic flights. Colonel Patterson's face darkened with anger as he recognized Hawkins. "I trusted that man with operational planning. He had access to flight schedules, pilot assignments, and maintenance coordination." "The evidence gets worse," Rodriguez continued, producing audio transcripts from covert surveillance. "We have recordings of Major Hawkins specifically instructing maintenance personnel to create, quote, realistic training scenarios that would test Lieutenant Chen's ability to handle equipment failures." General Kim read through the transcripts with growing fury. The carefully coded language couldn't disguise the criminal intent, and the systematic nature of the sabotage was clear from the documented conversations. "There's a third conspirator," Rodriguez announced, producing the most shocking photograph yet. It showed Lieutenant Colonel Brian Foster, the squadron commander, meeting with Hawkins in what appeared to be a coordination session. The revelation stunned everyone in the room. Foster was responsible for pilot evaluations and advancement recommendations for the entire squadron. His involvement explained how the conspiracy had been able to operate with such effectiveness and avoid detection for so long. Colonel Foster used his position to influence Chen's performance evaluations, ensuring that her exceptional flight skills were downplayed while equipment reliability issues were emphasized, Rodriguez detailed. He also coordinated with Hawkins to schedule her flights during conditions that would maximize the impact of the sabotage. Major Wells, who had worked directly under Foster's command, looked physically ill. "I wrote several memos recommending Chen for advanced training assignments. Foster buried every single one, claiming there were concerns about her equipment handling." The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming. Chen had been systematically undermined by the very people responsible for supporting and advancing her career. The conspiracy had operated at multiple levels, from technical sabotage to administrative manipulation. General Kim stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line, where Chen's F-16 was still surrounded by investigation teams. "The irony is almost poetic," he said quietly. "Their efforts to discredit Lieutenant Chen have provided us with the most compelling demonstration of exceptional pilot skills I've seen in 25 years of command." Agent Rodriguez nodded in agreement. The Sabotage created increasingly difficult conditions that showcased abilities none of them realized she possessed. Instead of proving her limitations, they proved her extraordinary capabilities. Colonel Patterson was reviewing the technical specifications of the jamming equipment that had been installed in Chen's aircraft. This level of electronic warfare simulation, we use similar equipment in advanced combat training programs. The fact that she not only overcame it but excelled under these conditions, it qualifies her for the most elite assignments in military aviation, General Kim finished. Test pilot school, special operations, even experimental aircraft programs that require pilots who can perform without electronic assistance. Chen finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sir, I appreciate the vindication, but what I really want to know is why. What could they possibly have gained by sabotaging my career?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The conference room door opened to admit Air Force Criminal Investigation Command Agent Patricia Larson, who had been conducting the broader investigation into corruption at Randolph Air Force Base. "Lieutenant Chen," Agent Larson said, "your sabotage was part of a larger pattern of career manipulation designed to advance specific individuals while eliminating competition. Major Hawkins was being considered for promotion to lieutenant colonel, and your exceptional performance threatened his advancement timeline." She spread additional documents across the conference table. Foster was coordinating similar efforts against other high-performing pilots, creating artificial barriers to advancement that benefited his preferred candidates. The documents revealed a systematic corruption network that had been operating for over 2 years. Multiple pilots had been subjected to various forms of sabotage and administrative manipulation, with Chen's case representing the most technically sophisticated and dangerous example. "The good news," Agent Larson continued, "is that your performance today has provided irrefutable evidence that completely exposes their methods. The investigation can now move forward with criminal charges that will likely result in court-martial proceedings for all 3 conspirators." General Kim returned to his seat at the head of the conference table. "Lieutenant Chen, before we discuss the legal proceedings, I want to address your immediate future. Your demonstrated abilities have attracted attention at the highest levels of Air Force Command." He opened a secure communication folder that had arrived during the meeting. "I have here preliminary orders for your immediate assignment to the United States Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. This is one of the most prestigious assignments in military aviation." Chen's eyes widened in disbelief. Test Pilot School was legendary among pilots, the proving ground for astronauts and experimental aircraft pilots. The selection process was notoriously competitive, and assignments were typically reserved for pilots with extensive combat experience. "Sir, I don't have combat experience or the usual qualifications for Test Pilot School," Chen protested. Colonel Patterson smiled for the first time since the investigation began. "Lieutenant, what you demonstrated today is rarer than combat experience. Visual navigation with instrument precision, successful mission completion despite total system failure, and perfect approach and landing without electronic assistance. These are exactly the skills needed for experimental aircraft testing." Agent Rodriguez added his perspective. "The criminal investigation has also revealed that your performance evaluations were systematically falsified. Your actual capabilities far exceed what appears in your official record, and the Air Force wants to ensure you receive opportunities commensurate with your abilities." The transformation was stunning. In the space of a single flight, Chen had gone from being a questioned pilot with equipment reliability issues to being recommended for one of the most elite assignments in military aviation. The sabotage intended to destroy her career had instead launched it to heights she had never imagined possible. But the vindication came with responsibilities. General Kim's expression became serious as he addressed the broader implications of the investigation. "Lieutenant, your case has exposed corruption that undermines the integrity of our entire pilot advancement system. You will likely be called to testify in court-martial proceedings, and your experience will be studied to prevent similar conspiracies in the future." Chen nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir. I want to ensure this never happens to another pilot." Agent Larson closed her investigation files. "The arrest will take place within the next 24 hours. Major Hawkins, Lieutenant Colonel Foster, and Technical Sergeant Cruz will all face charges including conspiracy, sabotage of military equipment, endangering military personnel, and violation of their oaths of office. The weight of justice was about to fall on the conspirators with devastating force. Their careers would end not just with discharge, but with criminal convictions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. As the meeting concluded, Chen realized that her vindication was complete but came at a personal cost. The betrayal by people she had trusted and respected would leave lasting scars, even as it opened doors to opportunities she had never dreamed possible. General Kim stood to dismiss the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed today represents both the worst and best of military service. Corruption and betrayal, but also exceptional skill, integrity, and the ultimate triumph of merit over manipulation. He turned directly to Chen. Lieutenant, report to my office tomorrow morning at 0800. We have a lot of details to work out regarding your new assignment, and I suspect you'll want time to process everything that's happened. As the senior officers filed out of the conference room, Chen remained seated for a moment, overwhelmed by the rapid transformation of her circumstances. Thompson, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, approached her with a satisfied smile. Lieutenant, in 20 years of maintaining aircraft, I've never seen anyone fly like you did today. Those bastards thought they were sabotaging your career, but they just proved you're the best pilot on this base. Chen looked up at the veteran maintenance chief with gratitude. Sergeant Thompson, thank you for believing in me and conducting a real investigation. Without your work, none of this would have come to light. Thompson shrugged modestly. Just doing my job, ma'am, making sure aircraft are safe and pilots get a fair shake. Besides, he grinned, watching those arrogant officers get their comeuppance is going to be the highlight of my career. The stage was now set for the final act of this drama. The arrests, court-martial proceedings, and ultimate justice would provide a satisfying conclusion to a conspiracy that had nearly destroyed an exceptional pilot's career. But more importantly, Chen's vindication would ensure that her extraordinary abilities could finally be put to their proper use in service of her country. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness at Randolph Air Force Base. Word of the investigation had spread through unofficial channels, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and nervous energy among the personnel. Chen reported to General Kim's office at precisely 0800 hours, unsure of what to expect but prepared for another day that would likely reshape her understanding of military service. Kim's office overlooked the main flight line, where the morning sun illuminated rows of training aircraft preparing for daily operations. The general was reviewing classified communications when Chen knocked and entered. Lieutenant, sit down. We have several important matters to discuss before the arrests begin. Kim's tone was businesslike but supportive. First, I want you to understand the scope of what your performance yesterday accomplished. He handed her a secure communication from Air Force headquarters in Washington. The message detailed how her flight had been reviewed by senior leadership, including the Chief of Staff of the Air Force himself. Your ability to complete a complex mission profile with total electronic failure has attracted attention at the highest levels, Kim explained. The test pilot school assignment is just the beginning. You're being fast-tracked for programs that typically require years of additional experience. Chen read through the official orders with amazement. The language was formal military bureaucracy, but the implications were extraordinary. She was being offered opportunities that most pilots could only dream of achieving. Sir, this is overwhelming. Yesterday I was worried about my next performance evaluation, and now you're being considered for experimental aircraft programs that push the boundaries of human flight capability, Kim finished. The irony is that your saboteurs created the exact conditions needed to demonstrate skills they didn't know you possessed. The general's secure phone rang with an urgent tone. He answered immediately, listening intently before hanging up with a grim expression. The arrests have begun. Major Hawkins was taken into custody 20 minutes ago. Lieutenant Colonel Foster's and Technical Sergeant Cruz will be in OSI custody within the hour. Chen felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication was satisfying, but watching careers destroyed and lives ruined was sobering, even when justice clearly demanded it. What happens to them now? Court-martial proceedings will begin within 30 days. The evidence is overwhelming, and all three will likely face dishonorable discharge, reduction in rank, and civilian criminal charges for conspiracy and equipment tampering. Kim walked to his window, watching as military police vehicles moved across the base with official efficiency. Foster's case is particularly serious. As a squadron commander, he violated the most fundamental trust placed in military leadership, the obligation to fairly evaluate and support subordinates. The phone rang again, this time with news that would add another dramatic element to the unfolding situation. General Kim listened briefly, then turned to Chen with an expression that mixed satisfaction with amazement. "Lieutenant, Major Hawkins has requested to speak with you before his formal interrogation begins. OSI believes he wants to make some kind of confession or apology." Chen was surprised by her own response. Despite everything Hawkins had done to sabotage her career, she felt curious rather than angry about what he might want to say. "I'll speak with him, sir, but I want Agent Rodriguez present as a witness." "Already arranged. The conversation will take place in the OSI facility under controlled conditions." An hour later, Chen found herself in a sterile interrogation room, facing the man who had orchestrated months of systematic sabotage against her career. Hawkins looked haggard and defeated, his usual confident demeanor completely gone. Agent Rodriguez operated recording equipment while maintaining professional neutrality. The conversation that followed would become part of the official court-martial record. "Lieutenant Chen," Hawkins began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an explanation, though I know it can't undo what I've done." Chen remained silent, allowing him to continue without prompting or reaction. "I saw your flight performance improving rapidly, and I knew you would eventually be selected for advanced assignments that I believed should go to pilots with more experience." Hawkins paused, struggling with the admission. "I convinced myself that creating equipment problems would simply delay your advancement until you had more seasoning." The rationalization was pathetic, and everyone in the room knew it. Hawkins had endangered Chen's life and sabotaged military equipment for purely selfish career advancement. "I never intended for the sabotage to become so extensive or dangerous," he continued. "But each test you passed made me more desperate to prove you weren't ready for combat assignments." Chen finally spoke, her voice calm and controlled. "Major, you didn't just sabotage my equipment. You undermined my confidence, made me question my own abilities, and put me in potentially fatal situations. Your intentions don't matter compared to what you actually did." Hawkins nodded miserably. "I know. And yesterday, when I watched you execute that approach with no instruments, I realized I had been sabotaging someone whose abilities far exceed my own." The confession was complete, but it provided no satisfaction for Chen. She had hoped for anger or indignation, emotions that would make the confrontation feel meaningful. Instead, she felt only pity for someone whose insecurity had driven him to destroy his own career while trying to harm hers. Agent Rodriguez concluded the interview and escorted Chen back to the main base, where another surprise awaited. Captain Reeves was waiting near the operations building with news that would add another layer to the day's revelations. "Sarah, I've been thinking about yesterday's flight all night," Reeves said urgently. "The precision you displayed, the navigation accuracy, the approach technique. Where did you really learn those skills?" Chen realized that her modest explanations about her grandfather's influence hadn't satisfied everyone who witnessed her performance. The truth was more complex and personal than she had revealed to anyone. "Linda, my grandfather didn't just teach me basic navigation. He was obsessed with precision flying techniques from the war. We spent every summer of my childhood practicing dead reckoning, celestial navigation, and emergency procedures, using methods that were cutting edge in 1944. Reeves listened with growing amazement as Chen described years of intensive training that went far beyond casual hobby flying. "He made me memorize topographical features across 3 states, practice mathematical calculations until they were instinctive, and develop visual acuity that could detect landmarks from impossible distances. What I demonstrated yesterday was the result of 15 years of preparation that I never expected to need." The revelation added another dimension to Chen's vindication. Her extraordinary performance wasn't just natural talent or lucky circumstances. It was the product of decades of specialized training that had prepared her for exactly the conditions the saboteurs had created. As the day progressed, news of the arrests and Chen's vindication spread throughout the Air Force community. Phone calls from former instructors, academy classmates, and senior officers created a constant stream of congratulations and amazement. The most significant call came from Colonel Janet Morrison, the commandant of the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. "Lieutenant Chen, your performance yesterday has been reviewed by our entire selection board. We want you to report to Edwards within 2 weeks for immediate entry into our experimental aircraft program." The speed of her career transformation was dizzying. Within 24 hours, she had gone from a questioned pilot to being personally recruited by one of the most exclusive programs in military aviation. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Thompson approached her near the flight line, where her F-16 was being restored to proper configuration after the investigation. "Lieutenant, I've been maintaining aircraft for 20 years, and I've never been prouder of a pilot than I was watching you yesterday. Those sons of bitches thought they were grounding you, but they just proved you're destined to fly higher than any of us imagined." Chen looked at her aircraft, now free of the sabotage equipment that had plagued her flights for months. Tomorrow, she would fly it one final time before transferring to Edwards, and she knew that flight would be perfect. Not because of flawless equipment, but because she had learned to excel regardless of the obstacles placed in her path. The power dynamics had completely reversed. Her tormentors faced career destruction while she prepared for assignments that would place her among the elite pilots of her generation. Justice had prevailed, but more importantly, merit had finally been allowed to triumph over manipulation. 6 months later, the early morning desert air at Edwards Air Force Base carried the distinctive sound of experimental aircraft pushing the boundaries of human flight. Chen stood on the tarmac beside an X-47 prototype, reviewing pre-flight checks for what would be her most challenging test flight to date. The sleek, angular aircraft represented cutting-edge technology that few pilots would ever have the opportunity to fly. The transformation in her circumstances was so complete that it sometimes felt surreal. The pilot who had once struggled with sabotaged radar systems was now testing aircraft that existed at the very edge of aeronautical possibility. Her nameplate on the test pilot roster read, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, a promotion that had come through in record time based on her exceptional performance and the Air Force's desire to retain and advance pilots with her unique capabilities. Colonel Morrison approached with the morning's flight briefing. The test pilot school commandant had become both mentor and advocate, guiding Chen through the transition from conventional fighter pilot to experimental aircraft specialist. Today's flight will test the aircraft's autonomous navigation systems under simulated electronic warfare conditions, Morrison explained. We're particularly interested in how the backup manual controls perform when all electronic assistance is compromised. Chen smiled at the irony. The skills that Hawkins had tried to discredit through sabotage were now exactly what made her invaluable for the most advanced aircraft testing programs. Her ability to fly without electronic assistance had become her signature capability. The mission profile includes terrain following at 200 feet through the Mojave Desert, followed by precision landing approaches using only visual references, Morrison continued. It's exactly the kind of flying that made you famous at Randolph. The reference to Randolph brought back memories of the investigation and court-martial proceedings that had concluded just 2 months earlier. All 3 conspirators had received dishonorable discharges, with Hawkins sentenced to 2 years in military prison for conspiracy and equipment tampering. Foster had received the harshest sentence, 5 years and reduction to the rank of private, due to his abuse of command authority. More importantly, the Air Force had implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar corruption in the future. Chen had been asked to help develop training programs that would teach other pilots to recognize and report suspicious equipment patterns. As she completed her pre-flight inspection of the X-47, Chen reflected on how the experience had changed her perspective on military service. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also revealed the strength of the system when honest people like Thompson, Wells, and Rodriguez worked together to expose corruption. The flight itself was a masterpiece of precision flying. The X-47's autonomous systems failed exactly as programmed, forcing Chen to take manual control during the most challenging portions of the test flight. She navigated through narrow desert canyons using visual references, executed high-speed terrain following with perfect altitude control, and completed a series of approach and landing tests that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their operational limits. The post-flight debrief was attended by engineers from 3 different aerospace contractors, Air Force research personnel, and representatives from NASA who were evaluating the aircraft for potential space program applications. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's performance today validates our confidence in manual backup systems for next-generation aircraft, the lead engineer reported. Her ability to maintain precision flight parameters without electronic assistance demonstrates that human pilots remain essential for experimental aircraft testing. After the debrief, Chen walked to the base communication center to make a call that had become a monthly tradition. She dialed the number for Randolph Air Force Base and asked to be connected to Thompson's maintenance hangar. "Sergeant Thompson, it's Sarah Chen calling from Edwards." Thompson's voice carried across the line with obvious pleasure. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, how's the experimental aircraft business treating you?" "Better than I ever imagined possible. I flew an X-47 prototype today using nothing but visual navigation through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat." Thompson chuckled appreciatively. "Sounds like those bastards who tried to sabotage you ended up giving you the perfect training for your current job." "That's exactly what happened. The skills I developed compensating for their sabotage are now my most valuable professional assets." They talked for several more minutes about technical developments, mutual acquaintances, and the ongoing improvements in maintenance oversight procedures. Thompson had been promoted to Master Sergeant and placed in charge of implementing new anti-tampering protocols across multiple bases. As Chen concluded the call, she realized how completely her perspective had shifted. What had seemed like career-threatening persecution had actually been preparation for opportunities she couldn't have imagined. The saboteurs had inadvertently created exactly the conditions needed to showcase abilities that qualified her for the most elite assignments in military aviation. Her final task for the day was mentoring a group of incoming test pilot candidates. These were experienced pilots from various backgrounds who aspired to join the experimental aircraft program. Chen's story had become legendary among aviation personnel, and her insights were sought by pilots facing their own career challenges. "The most important lesson from my experience," Chen told the assembled candidates, "is that obstacles often reveal capabilities you didn't know you possessed. The people who tried to sabotage my career forced me to develop skills that became my greatest professional assets." One of the candidates, a Navy pilot named Commander Jackson, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you maintain confidence when you're facing systematic undermining of your performance?" Chen considered the question carefully. "You focus on what you can control. Your preparation, your precision, your decision-making under pressure. External validation is nice, but internal standards are what really matter." As the mentoring session concluded, Chen walked to her assigned parking space, where a new Corvette waited, a gift to herself purchased with the bonus money that came with her rapid promotions and special assignment pay. The car represented more than transportation. It was a symbol of how completely her circumstances had transformed. Driving home to her off-base apartment, Chen passed the main gate of Edwards, where a sign proclaimed "Home of Flight Test, pushing the envelope." The phrase had special meaning for her now. Every flight pushed not just aircraft capabilities, but her own limits as a pilot. The apartment was modest but comfortable, decorated with photographs from her test pilot school graduation, commendations from successful test flights, and a framed letter from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force congratulating her on exceptional performance under the most challenging conditions. But the most meaningful item was a simple photograph of her grandfather in his World War II navigator's uniform. His dedication to precision and preparation had provided the foundation for everything she had accomplished. The skills he had taught her during childhood summers had ultimately saved her career and launched her toward achievements neither of them had imagined possible. As evening settled over the Mojave Desert, Chen reviewed the technical reports from the day's test flight. Tomorrow would bring new aircraft, new challenges, and new opportunities to push the boundaries of human flight capability. The girl who had once been underestimated and sabotaged had become the pilot that other pilots aspired to become. Her tormentors were forgotten footnotes to military justice, while she continued writing new chapters in the history of experimental aviation. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.